Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. Looks like a few folks are coming in still. So, well, first of all, welcome to the last day of PDC, and welcome to this lunch session. Thanks for coming by. Since you're here, I'm presuming you really want to know more about deployment. That's what's in the title. And I do hope I can provide you with more information with what's going on in the deployment arena. So my name is Saurabh Bhatia, and I'm a program manager with the Visual Studio for Business Applications team. The team was also known as the Visual Studio Tools for Office team, and that was a separate SKU of Visual Studio back in 2005. So in case you're wondering, that SKU is now part of Visual Studio Pro, and the team is now called just Business Applications team. I'm also joined by Andrew Whitechapel, who won't be presenting here, but he's going to maybe help me out with some demos later on, and definitely help answer any questions that you might have later on. So what do we have in store for you today? Let's click the forward button. There you go. So what I hope to give you today is kind of this overview of where deployment is and where deployment is going. And this is for Office client customizations built using Visual Studio Tools for Office technology and deployed using ClickOnce. So first, I'll give you a quick overview of where deployment was, where it is, and what we plan to do with it. And in order to tell the story in more detail, we'll take a look at a sample Office business application, which I think captures some of the generic pain points of deployment that exist in this space. So first, we'll deploy the sample application using existing technology in Visual Studio 2008. And then we kind of get into the meat of the session where we look at 3 new features that will improve the deployment of that same Office business application by mitigating some of the pain points that exist even today. So let's start with looking at deployment, the deployment timeline. This really started off in Visual Studio 2005, where we had something called emulated ClickOnce. It wasn't really ClickOnce. You still had to write your own MSIs. And I know there's a few folks in here who are nodding heads and have tried this out. You still have to write your own MSI. It kind of works like ClickOnce, but it's not really ClickOnce. All that changed, of course. In Visual Studio 2008, we adopted the real ClickOnce model. Right? You can use the Publish wizard in Visual Studio, and it'll generate the right prerequisite installers, the setup.exe that'll install the entire solution, including the prerequisites for you on the end user's machine. So things became a lot easier in Visual Studio 2008. But we're not done yet. We're going to take this further. We're going to enhance deployment even further in Visual Studio 2010. There's specifically 3 new things that we want to do that I'm going to talk about, which will help you deploy complex solutions that can consist of multiple projects together. The second feature would be allowing you to customize your ClickOnce deployment by writing your own actions. And the last one would improve the speed at which you can deploy by reducing the number of prerequisites required to run these solutions. So hopefully that gives you an idea of our overall commitment to improving deployment. And it's a continuous story here that we want to keep improving on what we delivered in 2005, 2008, and going forward in 2010. Now, I said we're going to look at a sample business problem in order to run it through the deployment process. And what I've chosen is a very generic problem where you're an organization and you want to perform certain auditing tasks on a regular basis. This is a classic case for an Office business client customization. So you as a developer are working in an organization that wants to pull in data from a particular source and perform some calculations on that data. The most obvious sort of solution that comes to mind is you want to pull that data into Excel because Excel has great functional and charting capabilities, right? So soon the solution sort of starts to look like you need a data source. And for this example, we're going to choose Outlook as a data source and pull that data into an Excel template. So there's going to be an Outlook add-in that runs inside Outlook, collects the data, and there's an Excel template that pulls that data in from Outlook. And once it's in Excel, you can perform whatever calculations you want to do in it. So let's take a quick look at what it really looks like, right? What is the business problem we are trying to solve here? I'm going to just switch over to this machine. There you go. So this is what the end user is going to see. This is a customized Excel template, and it's nothing fancy. It's just got a little button out there, which everyone can see. It's Get Data, and when I click on this button, it's going to go query Outlook and get all the data from my inbox in Outlook and just put it into Excel. And once it's in Excel, I can do whatever I want to do with it using Excel's inherent capabilities. So that's the simple runtime experience that you want to deliver. What does that mean in sense of actually developing and deploying the solution? So let's get back to the slides. Oops, wrong machine. There you go. What's the architecture of this solution that you want to deploy look like? First, in order to run the solution, you're going to need all the prerequisites on the end user's machine. This includes the .NET framework, the VSTO runtime, and the Office primary interop assemblies. Without this, your solution won't run. So you need to make sure all these exist on the end user's machine. Next, you actually need the Excel template itself. This is what we just saw. This is what the end user is going to interact with. This has the Get Data button. Now, this Excel template implements a function that's defined in a shared assembly. And this shared assembly is also talks to the Outlook add-in that implements that same function. So it's a common architecture of using a shared assembly by which Excel can talk to the Outlook add-in. Right? So those are the different moving parts, the inherent architecture of the solution. What does it mean to deploy this solution? What are the actual bits that need to get onto the end user's machine? Right? So we obviously need the 3 projects, the Excel template, the Outlook add-in, and the shared assembly. All of them need to be on the end user's machine. And you also need all the prerequisites on the end user's machine. Somehow we need to deploy all these things together on the end user's machine in order to make all of this work. So the story is possible. You can deploy the solution using existing technology in Visual Studio 2008. And now I'm going to actually show you how you can do this in 2008. And as I go through the process, we'll identify some of the pain points that do kind of exist today. So I'm going to switch back to this machine here where I was showing you the demo. I'll close this out. And I have this solution that's open, the Excel Outlook multi-project solution, and it has 3 projects in it: my add-in utilities, my Excel template, and my Outlook add-in. These are the 3 projects that we talked about. Now, in order to deploy this, I'm going to simply use the publish capabilities inside Visual Studio. So I'm going to just go right-click Properties, and I already had this publish page open over here. So I'm going to use these default settings and simply publish the Excel template. And in the publish process, it basically builds the Excel template and creates the correct setup.exe installer for you, which will install that solution on the end user's machine. So I've published my Excel template. I'm going to go do the same thing with the Outlook add-in. Right-click Properties, and I'm already in the publish page. Publish the Outlook add-in. So publish succeeded. So I've published both my solutions. Now I'm going to just open up the folder where I published these 2 solutions. And it is, I believe it is this folder. Yep. So I've published both my solutions, Excel template and Outlook add-in, to this folder. First, I need to install my Excel template. And you can hopefully see that there's a setup.exe that was created for me. There's also a .vsto file, which is a ClickOnce deployment manifest. And you can also double-click on this file to install the solution, but the caveat is that it won't install all the prerequisites. So I'm just going to run setup.exe over here. And it'll try to see if I have all the prerequisites. Since I already had it on this machine, it's just going to go to the customization installer directly. So I say install, yes, go ahead and install my Excel template. OK, great, my Excel template is installed. I go back to the Outlook add-in, and Outlook add-in has a similar structure here. I can double-click. This time I'll double-click on the My Outlook add-in, and I get the install prompt. Again, I click Install. So the Outlook add-in is installed. Now, I've installed both solutions. It was a little messy that I had to install them separately, but they were installed. Now I need to create a new worksheet based on the Excel template. So I go back to the Publish folder. I have my worksheet over here. I'm going to copy it to my desktop directory. I actually had it over there, but I'm just going to override it anyway. So I've copied the Excel template to my desktop. This is the same customized Excel template. And I create a new worksheet based on this template. And since I've already installed the solution, I get this Get Data button. When I click it, it's going to go talk to the Outlook add-in, which is also installed, and get the data. So what we've just saw was in VS 2008, you can use the existing publish functionality to publish two solutions and install them to the end user's machine, which includes with the inclusion of all the prerequisites needed to run the solution. So that's how you do it in 2008. But there were definitely some pain points, right? I had to install both solutions individually. From the end user's perspective, both these solutions kind of work together. You cannot use simply the Outlook add-in or simply the Excel template. You kind of need them both in order to run the complete end-to-end experience. But I couldn't provide one setup installer package for both solutions. I had to install them separately, individually. Also, ClickOnce in 2008 had a limited flexibility. You could not, say, copy an extra file like the Excel template to a particular folder, like my Documents folder or my desktop. I had to do that manually. Right? I could potentially write a script to do this and automate the process, but then it still gets broken up when you think about the ClickOnce update process. What happens when you try to publish an update to an application? You still have to copy that template manually all over to your My Documents or my desktop folder. So it wasn't very flexible in 2008, and it could only put things in the ClickOnce cache and not at any location of your choice. Lastly, we didn't see this, but there were 3 prerequisites that were needed in order to run the solution. All these 3 prerequisites require admin rights to install because they are impactful to install. And the 3 prerequisites are the .NET Framework, the VSTO runtime, and the Office primary interop assemblies. Now, the Office primary interop assemblies are kind of curious because they are very specific to the version of Office you are targeting your customization against. So if your customization, if you know that the end user is going to have Office 2007, then you need to deploy the primary interop assemblies for Office 2007. If they're going to have Office 2003, then you need to deploy the primary interop assemblies for Office 2003. So you exactly need to know which version of Office end users have before you can deploy these assemblies. So it's kind of a messy thing. Now, what we are going to do in Visual Studio 2010 is have 3 new features which will specifically address these pain points. First, we call something called multi-project deployment, which will allow you to package multiple individual add-ins or document customizations into just one ClickOnce package. The second feature we call post-deployment actions, which allow you to write your own custom action and tweak the ClickOnce deployment process in the way you see fit. And finally, a last feature is something we've been calling no PIAs, which promises to eliminate the whole need for having primary interop assemblies at all at runtime. So you're not going to need that prerequisite at all. So let's start digging into what all these 3 new features are about. First one is multi-project deployment. So multi-project deployment allows you to package multiple add-ins or Office document customizations in just one ClickOnce package. And there can be any number of such individual customizations, and they could be of any Office application. So as we just saw, we could package an Outlook add-in and Excel template together, or we could have multiple Outlook add-ins or multiple Excel templates all just packaged together in one ClickOnce package. All these customizations will install, update, and uninstall as just one solution. So you start thinking about it as a composite end-to-end solution instead of thinking about them as individual add-ins. Also, what we've made interesting is that you can choose to add or remove individual add-ins and templates as part of updates. So the composite application is defined by the sum. It's not necessarily defined by the sum of what makes it up. It's you who decide that version 1 of this application is going to have 2 Excel add-ins and 1 Outlook add-in, but say in version 2, I figured out a way of eliminating 1 Excel add-in, so it's just going to have 1 Excel add-in and 1 Outlook add-in. So we kind of let you decide this whole end-to-end view and let you deploy the whole composite Office business application instead of individual add-ins. So what does it mean to package a multi-project solution? What do you need to do in order to make this work? The trick to this lies in the ClickOnce application manifest. The ClickOnce application manifest contains information like all the reference files that your app is going to need in order to run. It also contains something called entry points, which are nothing but references to DLL assemblies, which need to be activated in order to activate your add-in. So what we've done to enable multi-project is we've allowed you to specify multiple entry points in the ClickOnce application manifest so that you can have multiple DLLs that get activated even though you're deploying all of them together in just one package. And since we are now allowing multiple entry points, we added another requirement that you need to specify an ID for each entry point, which is nothing but a unique string value. So that's what we've done. That's the packaging side of it. What's the end user experience? As expected, end users should only install one setup.exe, only run one setup.exe to install all applications. And to uninstall it, they only need one entry in programs and features, or add remove programs as it used to be called. So it's one step to install and one step to uninstall the whole composite app. All the files that are referenced in the application manifest, all the application files required to run the application are stored in the same ClickOnce cache location. So they can talk to each other because they are at the same place on the ClickOnce cache, and they don't have to look up each other in the obfuscated cache location. Also, the individual customizations that make up this multi-project, they'll get registered with the right Office application. So if you had an Outlook add-in, it's going to go under the HKCU Outlook add-ins hive, which is where Outlook is going to go find it and say, hey, OK, this add-in needs to be loaded when I start up. So all the individual customizations when you install this multi-project solution, will get registered with the appropriate Office application that needs to run them. So that's the theory of multi-project deployment. Let's take a look at how we can actually do this. So for that, I'm going to switch to another machine right here. Now, this is running Visual Studio 2010. This is, in fact, the same bits that are available on your hard drive for the CTP. So if you so choose to, you can actually try all this out on that CTP build. So I've opened up the exact same project in Visual Studio 2010. There's an additional project here called copy file. We'll come to it in a bit, but the other three remain the same. I have my add-in utilities, which is the shared assembly, the Excel template, and the Outlook add-in. And all I really need to do is update the application manifest for this solution in order to deploy it as just one ClickOnce package. Now, I need to put in a little disclaimer here saying that we don't have a good design time story yet. So I'm going to be mucking around with some XML in the application manifest in order to show you how this works. So hopefully no one's turned off by that. So I have previously published this solution, and I have created an application manifest which contains the multi-project solution. I'm just going to open that up. And this is a lot of XML. If you have ever opened up any ClickOnce manifest, you might find this familiar. But if you have not, then you don't have to look into it too much. Just to explain the point, I'm just going to go and highlight a couple of things that have changed in the schema. So first, I'm going to point you out to this dependent assembly here, which is the Outlook add-in dependent assembly. This means I'm packaging my Outlook add-in into this Click Once deployment package. Similarly, I also have the Excel template down here, which means I'm packaging all my files in this Click Once deployment package. So this is just telling you that, OK, all the files that are required to run this application are now part of that same application manifest. And the only other thing that has changed over here is, as I said, was the ability to specify multiple entry points. And I've specified one entry point for my Excel template. And if I scroll down a bit, I have another entry point for my Outlook add-in. So this gives you an idea that these are the two add-ins that actually need to be installed and activated when this solution is installed. So enough mucking around in XML. Let's simply try and install the solution and see what happens. So I've published my multi-project. This is the same file. I've opened it up over here. I have the .vsto file. I'm going to double click on it. It's going to show me the install prompt. I install, and OK, it's installed. So this doesn't make a very good demo, though, right? It's just installed everything. But what's important here is that I just installed one solution. And based on that, I can open up my template. I have the Get Data button. I click on it. And the Outlook add-in should also be installed, and it is. That's why it gets this data from the Outlook add-in. Earlier, I needed two separate steps in order to install both solutions and then make this end-to-end experience work. Now you just need one installer, and you can just install both solutions together through a multi-project deployment. So that's the multi-project deployment story. I'm quickly going to close this up and also show you what happens at uninstall. So that I'm going to go to uninstall or change my program. And my program was called my audit solution, which is right over here. I simply uninstall it. And it's going to uninstall both the Excel template and the Outlook solution from my system. So sorry about that. Both of them are now gone. All right. That might have woken you up, at least, in case I was boring you. So let's get back to the slides and move on to some more interesting stuff. What we just saw was multi-project deployment that has, and this was the XML that we saw that got changed in order to enable packaging different files in and also enabling different entry points in the application manifest. So what we saw was with multi-project deployment, you can now package multiple solutions. All of them will install, update, and uninstall through just one install point, one .vsto file. And all of the changes that need to be made are in the application manifest in order to support multi-project deployment. So moving on to the second feature for today, and this gets even more interesting, post-deployment actions. Post-deployment actions are developer-defined custom actions that allow you to hook into the Click Once deployment process. So this is very interesting. For the first time, we are letting you, the developer, tweak that Click Once install, update, and uninstall process by writing your own custom action. Right? So you get a hook into that complete process, and you can pretty much do what you want it to do. So what can you do with a post-deployment action? As I said, absolutely anything, as long as it's in the current user privilege. This is kind of the standard Click Once mechanism in which it says you have to be as invoker only. You cannot do anything that requires admin rights. It has to be, it's the philosophy of a low impact solution. So whatever you do, you need to do it as the current user. You can do simple things like copying a template to your My Documents folder or to your My Templates folder. You can create desktop shortcuts, or you could read-write registry keys as long as it's inside HKCU. But you can also go crazy and come up with a lot of wild ideas. I'm not going to give you any suggestions because there's a lot of test folks who are going to freak out and say, why did we open this up? But essentially, the goal is that we want you to do these extra steps and customize the whole Click Once deployment process to your needs. So where does a post-deployment action fit in to this Click Once deployment process? I think that should give you a very high-level overview of what the different steps involved in ClickOne's deployment. The very first one is there's a trigger that occurs to trigger off the install or update process, right? Maybe the user double-clicks on the file to install it, or maybe it's time to check for updates, and it goes out and checks for updates. So the trigger for install or update occurs. And the first thing that the ClickOne's runtime is going to do is it's going to go download the deployment and application manifests. Once it gets this and it's downloaded to the end user's machine, it's going to perform some security checks on it. And this includes the file hashes and the publisher certificates that were used to sign these manifests. Once all of these is cleared, the security checks are cleared, then it's going to go ahead and start downloading the application files into the ClickOne's cache. This is also where, if you have any post-deployment actions defined, it gets downloaded to the ClickOne's cache. Now, once you have all these files, including the post-deployment action in the ClickOne's cache, that's when we call out and say, hey, you have the post-deployment action, go run it. That's when we give you that hook and saying, OK, go run whatever you want to do in that post-deployment action. And that's the absolute last step before we finish the install. So we give you this hook at the absolute end. You cannot change anything that happens before it. And the only thing left to do after it is finish the install. So that's why that's where the name comes from. It's a post-deployment action. A couple of more interesting things about post-deployment actions. You can specify multiple post-deployment actions for a single ClickOne's package. So it's very similar to the multi-project concept where you can have multiple add-ins inside one package. Similarly, you can have multiple post-deployment actions inside the same package. And what's interesting is that each action would get run in its own app domain. So in case you do something bad and you tend to crash that post-deployment action, it doesn't take down the whole process, the install process. It's just your post action that's going to go down. And we've kind of put in some checks over there so that we ensure that in case something bad happened, your post-deployment action went down, we call it again with the opposite of the status and let you undo anything that you did in case you were not able to complete an operation. So we kind of give you this opportunity to clean up the system in case something goes wrong. So how do we go about writing this post-deployment action? And there's really two steps to it. First, you need to actually write the code, which involves the post-deployment action. And in order to do this, you will there's an interface that we provide called the add-in post-deployment action interface, which is a very long and obvious name, but it's a very simple interface, and we'll take a look at it in a second. And the next step is once you have created this post-deployment action and implemented the interface, you need to update, again, the application manifest to include this post-deployment action with the whole ClickOne's package. So what is the post-deployment action interface? It's just one method. It's very simple. One method called execute. And this method takes arguments of the type, again, a very long name, add-in post-deployment arguments. And these arguments essentially give you a way of figuring out where in the ClickOne's deployment process you are. So some of the interesting highlights for these properties are the installation status. The installation status is going to tell you whether you are being called as part of an install or part of an update or, say, part of an uninstall or a rollback. So by looking at this value, you can actually figure out what you want to do based on the step in the ClickOne's process you are in. Another interesting variable is the add-in path, and this is the location of the obfuscated ClickOne's cache on the end user's ClickOne's end user's local disk. So usually you don't get access to this location directly, but since you are a post-deployment action, you may need access to this obfuscated location. So we do provide that to you. So this is a sample post-deployment action. This is what it would look like if you had to create one of the simplest actions. There's just one method in there called execute. And inside that, we've basically said, OK, we just use the case statement on the installation status and say, these are the different things I want to do during install, update, or uninstall and rollback. And obviously, whatever you do in install, make sure you undo it in uninstall. And similarly, whatever you do in update, you need to do the inverse of that in rollback. So a very simplistic mechanism of performing an action and undoing it. Now, the second step is to actually associate this post-deployment action that you have written by implementing that interface into an XML, into the application manifest. And this is done through the post-action XML. And what it essentially defines is, again, an entry point for the post-deployment action. And in this case, the entry point is the DLL that defines this post-deployment action interface. And once you have defined this entry point, that post-deployment action gets associated with that click once deployment package, and it will be run every time there's an install or update that triggers the click once deployment process. Another useful mechanism here is that if you want to pass more data to your post-deployment action, you can specify it in the application manifest under post-action data tags. And whatever is specified in here will get passed on to the post-deployment action. So the idea here is that you could have a generic post-deployment action that you define that takes different input data as they are defined in the application manifest. And depending on this input data, you can change what the action would actually do. So this is just trying to sort of, This was trying to make it more reusable, make your post-deployment action more reusable by simply passing it different kinds of data. So let's take a look at the post-deployment action in action. I'm going to switch back to the machine here. So I'm back in Visual Studio 2010, and I have that exact same project open. And now we're actually going to look at the first project that we kind of skipped over earlier. And this is the copy file post-deployment action. And in that, I have one CS file, which basically implements the I-add-in post-deployment action interface. Right? So this is my post-deployment action. And in that, I have just one method called the execute method. And what I'm going to do in this post-deployment action is I'm going to take my Excel template that we saw in our Office Business application and copy it to the current user's My Templates folder, so that if a current user wants to access that template, they can simply use Excel's Office button, new My Templates, and be able to access the Excel template through that means instead of having to manually copy the Excel template over to their desktop. So it's a very simple post-deployment action. There's two things that we do when you're trying to install or update the solution. That's the case statement. We are going to, sorry if you can read that. We're going to copy the file from the Click Once cache location to the My Templates location during initial install or update. And when you try to uninstall the solution, that's the next step here, we simply delete the file so that you uninstall the solution. It shouldn't be in your My Templates location. So that's a very simple post-deployment action. Now, the second step was we need to associate this post-deployment action with the actual Click Once deployment process. This means we need to muck around in some XML again. So to save us all time, I have a ready-made XML file, which is right over here, the auditsolution.dll.manifest, which is the application manifest. I'm going to open that up. This is the same file we saw earlier, but this time around, if you look at it, first I have included this post-deployment action assembly in the manifest so that it also gets downloaded along with all the other application files. And next, here's where I've actually specified the post-action XML, in which I say the entry point for this post-deployment action is the copy file post-deployment action method. And in this particular case, I'm not passing it any extra data in the application manifest, so it's just going to simply execute this post-deployment action whenever you try to install or update this Click Once package. So what does that mean at runtime? We've looked at the XML. Let's just simply try and install this solution with this post-deployment action. So first, I've uninstalled everything. What I'm going to show you is I'm going to open up Excel and go to File, New, go to My Templates. There's absolutely nothing here, right? What I want to do is install the solution and run the post-deployment action so that my customized template gets installed in the user's My Templates folder and shows up in that UI. So I'm going to go to the publish path for the post-deployment action. And that is it. And I'm going to double-click on this .vsto file. I get the install prompt. I say install. All right, it installed. OK, now let's open up Excel again. I go back to Excel. Oops, something went wrong. You're seeing something else here. So that's what happens when you try to touch up the demo right before you start your talk. Now I'm going to try and uninstall this solution again because I accidentally installed another solution which we are going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, and try and install the exact solution that we want. So I uninstall what I just installed and replace this file so that it installs the correct solution that we are looking for. Oops. There you go. Yes, now I have the correct version of the solution I want to install, and I double-click on it. I say install. OK, it installed. Now, hopefully, it's going to have the correct version. I open up Excel. Yes, nothing showed up. I go to New. I go to My Templates. And there you go. That's my customized Excel template. I double-click on it. It's going to have the Get Data button. I click on the Get Data button. And because this was also a multi-project solution, it has also installed the Outlook add-in along with the solution. And your whole end-to-end deployment is now on the end user's machine by simply running one file. Right? So that's really great. That kind of shows you the power of multi-project and post-deployment actions together and how you can create your own customized deployments for your specific needs. So let me close that and move on to the second topic. What you saw a brief preview of in the taskbar over there with the other information was actually a solution update that we want to provide. So far, we've deployed version 1 of the solution, which included the template and an Outlook add-in. And now you decide you want to update your entire solution. You want to update the Outlook add-in and add another method to it, which, say, supports an additional parameter where you want to filter the data that you get by the number of days. So you want to update Outlook add-in, add another method to it, and allow the data to be filtered by the number of days. You also realize that instead of using an Excel template, you really want to use an Excel add-in and then dynamically add the data onto any active worksheet that the user may have open. Right? You just think that's a more robust way of implementing your solution. So what you want to do now is go from version 1 to version 2. And in version 2, you're going to have the same updated version of the Excel add-in. You're going to replace the Excel template with an Excel add-in and use the new function defined in the updated Outlook add-in to filter the data that you get by the number of days. So now we're going to switch back to the demo and look at what you got a sneak peek of before. That's the wrong machine. So I'm back at this machine here. To save some time, I already have an updated version, the V2 of the solution. I'm going to open that up. And in this V2, there's, again, 4 projects. The post-deployment action, the My Add-in utilities. Now, instead of the Excel template, I have replaced it with the Excel add-in. right? And I still have the Outlook add-in, but it's been updated to have this new extra method involved in it. Now, the very first thing that you have to consider is that you've already deployed, and there are people out there who have installed version 1 of your solution. Now, when they installed version 1, the initial post-deployment action would have copied over the template to their My Templates folder. So when you're going to version 2, you need to make sure that if previous users had version 1 and had that template in their My Templates folder, you need to delete that in version 2. And you can do that through the post-deployment action in version 2. So your Office Business Solutions version 2's post-deployment action will, instead of copying the template from the cache to the end user's location, it'll delete any existing templates that may exist on the end user's machine. So let's look at what that looks like. And it's a very simple example here. It's already open. So this is my version 2 post-deployment action, in which I again implement the execute method. And over here, for installation status of initial install or an update, I am going to simply delete the file if it exists on the end user's My Templates folder. So I have changed my post-deployment action to match this need. Now, I have also updated the application manifest for this new version 2 so that it gets rid of the Excel template and puts in the Excel add-in, right? So it's a very simple change. Let me just open that up, and there you go. You have, instead of having Excel template, you have the dependency for an Excel add-in. The Outlook add-in dependency, which is right over here, it stays the same because it already was there in version 1 of the product. And so does the post-deployment action. So I've changed the post-deployment action so that it now deletes the file, and I've updated the application manifest so that it now contains the Excel add-in and not the Excel template. Now let's see what happens when you try and publish this update. So, well, I've already created the update, so I'm not going to publish it. I'm going to try and get the update as an end user. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to go to the install point. This was the publish location where I published everything. This is also where I installed version 1 of the solution. And I'm going to do a little trick over here. Inside this application files folder, and this exists even in Visual Studio 2008, we keep different versions of every solution that you publish out. So I have put version 1001, I'm calling it, which is version 2 of the solution, over here. And there's a deployment manifest over here which points to this new version. So I'm going to take this version 2 and copy it back over to the root folder where I installed the entire solution from. What this is going to do is when the end user tries to check for updates, it's going to go look at version 2 now and say, hey, this is a more updated version of the solution. Go download the bits for me. Now, in order to see this experience, I'm going to actually open up Outlook, because there's also an Outlook add-in, and we haven't really seen an Outlook add-in yet because there's no UI to it, right? It's simply sitting there and collecting data. You only know it exists because you can actually pull in the data from Excel into the Outlook add-in. So let's stat Outlook. And as soon as I start it, it's going to check for updates, and you'll have to kind of look for it right there as it goes ahead and downloads the update. Oh, that was too quick. Sorry. So what it's just done is it's gone ahead and downloaded the update. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out a way of slowing this down, but hopefully you saw a little pop-up there which said, OK, the update has been downloaded. Now, all I can do is I can close Outlook, or I could do whatever. I need to go back to Excel and see if the Excel add-in got installed, right? So I open up Excel. And sure enough, this was the earlier taskbar that you saw. The add-in is installed. And when I click Get Data, it's going to talk to the Outlook add-in and get data from it. There's also this additional days to fetch, which I can set to whatever. So if I set it to 0, it's not going to return anything. So this is the updated Outlook add-in, which is taking advantage of the new method in the updated Outlook add-in. So we also need to check whether the My customized template that was inside My Templates folder has now been deleted because this update was downloaded. So I'm going to click on New again and go back to the My Templates application, and all right, there's nothing here. So the post-deployment action essentially deleted whatever was there on my machine as part of the update process. So I'm just going to close that out. Go back here. So that is post-deployment actions. And together with multi-project, it really opens up a lot of possibilities, as we just saw. You could literally come up with your own versioning scheme for your applications and start thinking about your Office Business solution as a big composite solution instead of looking at them as individual add-ins or individual document customizations. So we really hope that you can go ahead and start using this powerful and flexible mechanism. And the only word of caution there would be the power is now in your hands, so use it wisely. So the last feature for this talk is something we call No PS, or No More PS. And this, in fact, is it's not just related to VSTO or Office customization, but it's a change in CLR 4. And the impact of this is so widespread that I think Misha Schneerson, who I'm not sure if he's here right now, but he gave a whole other talk about advances in the .NET type system to enable the feature itself. And I think VSTO is sort of the first consumer of this feature where we see this impact in very directly. So what is this feature all about? I think it's just one concept here. It's type embedding. The information that was previously stored in the Office primary interop assemblies in order to call into the Office COM objects can now, in fact, be embedded inside your user assembly itself. So if you're developing a VSTO customization and you make some primary interop calls, all the calls you make, the information about that can directly be embedded into your Office assembly. Essentially, we've eliminated the runtime dependency on interop assemblies altogether. But we still have the design time benefits. So you can continue to use your primary interop assemblies at design time in VS. It's just that at runtime, you don't need them anymore. Right? So let's look at a little picture which might hopefully explain this a little better. So you're in VS. You're using the VS Code editor. You reference a primary interop assembly. And you can still get IntelliSense, and you can still get the whole autocomplete behavior, and which you're already used to, and it works just great. Now you compile your assembly and try to run it. So the C# or VB compiler, whatever your language of choice is, will actually embed the type information for the types you used into your client assembly itself. So what that means is you no longer need to have a reference at runtime to the primary interop assemblies because the partial type information is embedded in your client assembly. Now, if that sounds still a little complicated, let's just look at a demo, and that's where we can actually see what that impact is. Back to this machine. So I'm back in Dev 10 and back in Visual Studio 2010, which is also known as Dev 10, in case you're wondering. Now, in order to illustrate that this has a very broad impact, instead of creating an Office solution, I'm actually going to create a console application and then automate Word through that console application. So I just go File, New Project, and create a console application. Let's call it No More PS. And in this console application, I am going to add a reference. I'm going to automate Word and do a little simple Hello World automation with Word. So I'm going to add a reference to the Microsoft Interop Word assembly, which is all the way here. So that's my reference. And I am going to start using it. And I'm going to do something very simple. I think I already have a code snippet here, right? So it's a very simple thing. I create a new Word application. I add a document to it right here, and I simply use a selection and insert some hello world text after it. So when I run this, it should open up Word and display a little hello world over there. So a very simple Word automation. Now, over here, I basically added a reference in the design time to the primary interop assembly and used it to create this Word automation process. Now let's get into the no more PF feature. What does it do? Before I go there, though, let's take a look at what the actual assembly information that we created, what does the assembly contain, right? We just created a new console application that automated Word, which means there was an exe created for it in the big bin debug folder, the no more ps.exe. I'm going to open this up in ILDASM to give you an idea of what it was doing internally. So I have ILDASM, which is the IL disassembler ready over here. And hopefully you can see that. So this is my no more PS assembly. And in its manifest, it was referencing the Office interop Word assembly right over here. This means when you want to run this assembly, you need to have the Office interop Word assembly on the end user's machine. So now we can go back and look at the no PS feature. So this is my Office interop Word reference right over here. And to enable the no more PS feature, there's a property that's associated with all assemblies called embed interop types, which is right over here. It's currently set to false. I'm going to just set it to true. And that's it. I'm going to hit debug again. And it still works. You still see the hello world. So nothing changed here. The runtime experience is consistent. But now let's open up this new .exe that was built in ILDASM and see what it references. So I'm going to open it up again in the IL disassembler. And let's open up the manifest. All right. There is no reference to interop Word over here. That means when you try to run this assembly, you don't need to have that interop Word assembly on the end user's machine. What's also interesting is that you'll see another type defined over here, which is the Microsoft Office interop type. So the type has been now embedded into the assembly. But it's not the whole interop assembly that got embedded. It's only the methods that you used. So I was adding a document. That's why the documents type got embedded. And inside this, if you can see, there's just one method called add that got embedded in this client assembly. Similarly, I was using selection. And inside selection, I was using just one method called insert after to insert the hello world. So only that method got embedded inside the client assembly. So this is kind of partial embedding of the primary interop assembly. We don't embed the whole assembly. You don't want that. That's a couple of megabytes. Only the stuff that you used in your application gets embedded. So that's very interesting. And the direct consequence of this is essentially you no longer need the whole primary interop Redis package on end user's machine in order to run any of your Office customizations. You can simply use this new feature and start embedding all your interop types that you use in your client assembly itself. So that's no more PS. New feature in .NET 4.0. It has a much broader impact than Office customizations, but the greatest is the first one to sort of get this direct impact is going to be Office customizations, because we are effectively reducing one entire prerequisites from the list of prerequisites required to run this application. And we hope to increase the speed at which you can now deploy your customizations. So those are the three features for today. And I'm just going to quickly review sort of what we went through today. We started off with this Office business solution, which had different moving paths: the Excel template, the Outlook add-in, the shared assembly, and the different prerequisites that were needed. First, we kind of bundled all the project files together in just one click once package, and that was multi-project deployment. Next, we made things interesting by copying over the Excel template to the My Templates folder, which was done through a post-deployment action. And then we took it a step further and updated the solution. And in the update, we basically replaced the Excel template with an Excel add-in and got rid of the template that was stored in the user's My Template folder. And that, again, was through a combination of multi-project and post-deployment actions. And finally, we saw the No PS feature, which essentially gets rid of the number of prerequisites required to run all of this, and now it's just down to 2, the .NET Framework and VSTO runtime. So that's what we saw today, and that's towards the end of my talk. I won't go over those slides again. There's some interesting resources if you are interested in. There's the VSTO team blog, which is very active. And if you have any deployment-related questions, this is actually monitored by pretty much the whole team. And you can just go to it, post your own questions on it, or read the different blogs that keep getting put on over there. So with that, I think I need to remind you that there is a Q&A session and also a eval session, which is this slide. So I think the code for this talk is TL01, so please do go ahead and fill out the evaluations on Microsoft PDC site. And with that, if you have any questions around anything, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I have a question regarding click once. In a project I worked some years ago, we tried to do some click once, and it had some particular security requirements. We have to go to the CASPO and do a lot of stuff there. I recently saw another session regarding single user deployment, which is kind of easier for from the security standpoint. Is something of that coming into?
So you had
Office?
2 questions there. First one was, do you still have to kind of mess around in CAS? No, that was kind of the 2005 model of things, where you had to write your CAS policy and specify things for your assemblies. With the new click once model, it just works on the trusted publisher model. And if your publisher is trusted, then we trust your solution. So it's very similar to what you have for WinForms and WPF applications, where you need to sign your manifest with a trusted publisher that chains up to a root certificate authority. And the second question, I believe, was a single user install versus an all users install.
Exactly.
So yeah, click once is by the philosophy is kind of been it's a single user install, but the limitation there is not in click once. Ironically, it's the way Office deals with certain add-ins. So we've some documented, I guess I would call them workarounds on how you can enable installing to all users. But the idea is Office doesn't want you to install something at the admin level, which, say, might mess up your system, and then the end user cannot disable it because you require admin privileges to disable it. So at the moment, there's no such plans of changing that, but we are definitely looking at a better solution. It might not be a click once solution, but it's more of an Office-based solution which will enable an all users install. So we can talk about that later if you want. Yes?
Does this no peers technique allow you to deploy a solution for multiple versions of Office with one build?
Going for, like Office 2007 and Office 14.
Or say 2003 and 2007, yeah, exactly.
If it's a VSTO solution, there was a slight problem across 2003 and 2007 because we used a different runtime and a different deployment mechanism. So 03 and 07 was a little bit of a different case. But going forward, 2007 and forward, yes, it should be. And the problem with 03 is not because of the no PS, but because there was a different deployment model underneath the sheets.
Thanks.
Yep. Hi there.
Actually, to follow up this question, it has to do with, you were saying Office 2003. What about Office XP?
Sorry,
With
yeah.
No PS, yeah.
So you can use you can use the No-PS feature, say in a console app where you want to automate Office XP, and you want to embed it. So if you have the .NET 4.0 framework and you want to automate Office XP, that will work. But if you want to use the whole click once deployment process and use a VSTO add-in, that's not going to work. So
I don't care about the click once thing. I'm talking more just in terms of the, right now we have to compile each of our add-ins using the PS, right? And we have to, and we're actually deploying each of the Office version PS for whatever version they are.
Yep. So what kind of add-ins are these actually? Are they shared add-ins based on COM directly, or are they VSTO based add-ins?
We do both kinds. So you're saying VSTO, we won't be able to, right?
Yeah,
so
but you could do it with COM.
What about COM though? Is my question now.
You could, yeah.
So
VSTO actually doesn't go back all the way to XP. So you could, if you have a COM add-in that works with XP, then yes, you can use No-PS with that.
Okay, so it'll work all the way through. Just okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. All right. So that looks about it. No more questions. I'm going to hang out here if you have any other questions to come by. All right. Thank you all.